Hey listeners, this is your host Brian Almeida. I have a special announcement before we get started on this week's solo episode. I'm going to be offering a handful of my guests what I want to call a 15-minute discoverable call. This is just 15 minutes with me to discuss anything you want, podcasting, something going on in your life, facing vulnerability, whatever it might be. I'm going to include a link for my calendar in the show notes where you can book your 15-minute call, and I look forward to speaking with some of you soon. Thanks and take care. Welcome to the Vulnerable Podcast. I'm your host, Brian Almeida. Each week we'll share inspiring stories and tips on facing vulnerability and the lessons we can use to help us be able to find success and fulfillment in our own lives. With each episode, we hope to impact one listener, and if anything you've heard has impacted you, we'd appreciate you sharing it on social. Thank you for listening. Now let's get vulnerable. Today is Relatable Thursday. Hey listeners, welcome back for another episode of Relatable Thursday. So this week I want to talk to you guys about doing the inner work or self-work or self-improvement. It doesn't really matter what you call it or how you define it. It's just really sort of taking that time to work on yourself at the end of the day. And the reason I want to talk about this in depth today is because I've talked a lot about, losing my job a few years ago. And then now I'm at a place where I've, sort of discovered my values and achieved more alignment in my life. But I make it sort of sound like I lost my job and the next day this all happened. And obviously I've talked about other things that have happened, but I haven't really got into sort of doing the inner work and what it takes and all that kind of stuff. So I figured I'd come on today and talk to you guys about that. So like I said, for me, when I lost that job a few years ago, the first, reaction wasn't to go and do the inner work. I think that one thing that I think we all need to maybe do a little bit before you get into this and before you start doing this is just relax a bit. I mean, for me, I lost that job. I took a couple months off and just really didn't do a whole lot of much, simply because I think that I just needed to decompress from, the years of just, constantly grinding, constantly working, and the fact that I hadn't really done any of the work before that. And I think that at the end of the day, we have to understand that this is some of the hardest work that we're ever going to do, and that it's going to be an ongoing, lifelong journey. So, I don't want to make it sound like the last few years I've done it and it's done now and that's it and it's over, because I don't think that's the case at all. It's going to take a lot of time. It's going to take a lot of effort. There's going to be ups. There's going to be downs. I mean, when I started doing the inner work, I had a lot of ups. I was, learning about things that I enjoyed doing. I was doing more things that I enjoyed, like writing and going out to networking events and all these other things. And so it was a lot of ups and a lot of these, these good highs, feeling great and everything like that. And then there were downs where, I felt like, okay, I've done X, Y, and Z, but now I don't feel like I'm any further ahead than I was. And I'm sure if I had to reflect a little bit more, maybe I could have found them, but it's just that there's it's not all going to be good, like at the end of the day. And I think the other issue too is that, I didn't do any of this work before I lost that job. So, I mean, I spent 30 years sort of, and not obviously 30 years, but let's say the good part of 13 or 14 years where I was just working every day and just the daily grind of life and everything else that comes along with it. And I wasn't taking any time for myself or to sort of, learn who Brian was or figure out who Brian was. And I think that the longer you wait, like I did, the worse it and the harder it is to go through this stuff, because at the end of the day, the longer you take, the more crap there is to go through, to be honest. And believe me, there is a ton of crap for me to sort of go through, just because of the fact that, like I said, I hadn't really put any focus on myself for quite some time, right? So the way I started for me was, I picked up some books, I talked to friends, I mentioned a friend of mine, Erik before, who just sort of and gave me the encouragement to look at some of my previous hobbies and start doing them again. There was the support of my wife, who basically said, as soon as I lost that job and when I was getting into that stage of like, okay, let's start putting my resume out there and let's find another job, she was one of the people who said to me, like, why don't you just take some time to like figure things out, maybe sign up for unemployment, which is something that I never thought about doing. And honestly, there was some maybe shame behind it, but I'm glad that I did at the end of the day, because it provided me a little more time to do some of that work and figure out who I was. Right. And then I think at the beginning, it was easy to do on my own. Like I said, I was just trying new things, going out and doing different things, reigniting hobbies from the past and so on. But eventually it got to a point where I felt like I was at sort of a stalemate where I'd done all this different stuff, but I hadn't, like I said, got much further ahead than I was when I started. And, for me, one thing that helped was reaching out to friends, and I ended up working with a coach who I still work with today. I needed to actually sort of acknowledge the fact that I needed some help, which wasn't the easiest thing to do because I've always been the type of person that just thinks I, know everything and can do everything, but that's definitely not the case. And I've realized that more and more as time has progressed, and just figuring out a lot of these things have opened up a lot of other areas for me. I mean, I know for me, one thing that's really changed is just I sort of I focus a lot more on listening to my heart or following my heart rather than my head, because I think your mind can play a lot of games on you, and it's definitely played a lot of games on me throughout the years. And when I started doing that, I noticed things like, certain emotions and everything that I hadn't maybe recognized for a long time, whether that be, anger, sadness, whatever it might be. I just had noticed that for the most of my life, I didn't really pay attention to those things. I just sort of let them pass, or I would spend like I'd get angry and I'd get really 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 angry, and not really try and work through it, but just more so let it sort of take over and spiral and so on. And then even in terms of just like sadness and getting upset, for a long time I just didn't let myself get to there. Or if I was upset or sad about something, I wouldn't let myself really feel it. I'd just do something to suppress it or move past it. And when I did start to do a lot of this work and I started to open up a bit more, I noticed like just a huge amount of emotion that was just sort of coming out of me, whether it was having a talk with my wife and breaking down bawling because I was actually letting my feelings sort of come out and I was actually expressing them, whether it was a TV show or a movie that would definitely trigger some sort of emotions. It was definitely a weird experience, but a great one at the same time. It felt like sort of this huge weight that had been on my shoulders for years, just, trying to, I guess, in a way, like be a man and like not show my emotions. It felt like this weight was just released off of me. And it was actually a really great feeling to know that I could, sort of let these things go or work through them. Whereas, like I said, in the past, I didn't allow myself to do that. And lastly, I think the biggest change, which I've mentioned in multiple episodes and multiple subjects, is that I started practicing gratitude more frequently. And I think that practice alone made a lot of the work easier, because once you start to practice gratitude, you just become more grateful for everything in life. And that just started to shift my mindset around a lot of things in terms of, the fact that, my goals before were to make $100,000 a year and be, how work my way up in the sort of corporate ladder or whatever however you want to look at it. And, now it was sort of like things were changing because I was just realizing that my values weren't actually in that anymore. And I think a lot of that came because of the gratitude, because of realizing that, money and things, material things don't really bring you much happiness or fulfillment. It's more the experiences and the people and so on. And that was something that gratitude really helped me present. So I don't know, if you're listening to this right now, if you've done the inner work, if you've maybe thought about starting to do it, or, if you started it at one point and given up, whatever the case might be, if you're sort of in that point right now in life where you're like, something doesn't feel right and I feel like I need to do something about it, chances are there's some inner work or some self work that needs to be done. So, I think for me, the one thing I would say to start, as a suggestion on how you might get started doing this, I think the first thing you really need to do is you need to sort of break everything down in your life. You need to sort of, and what I mean by that is you basically need to like look at your life and go, okay, what is not working for me? Like what hasn't been working for me? What doesn't feel right? What doesn't feel good? And not only do this with yourself, but work with family and friends as well. If there's issues in relationships or anything like that, work on them, talk to those people, like try and fix them a bit, because I think for the initial stage, you really just have to work through a lot of the crap. Like I said earlier on in the episode, there's a lot of crap you're going to have to dig through. And I think the first stage is to sort of look at all that and break it down into like chunks and say, okay, okay, what do I need to work on for myself? What do I need to work on in a relationship or whatever? And then from there, you can start to sort of rebuild, right? You need to really build that foundation with those people and yourself before you start building up, and doing the work that's going to get you to the next stage, right? I think next, I would say the next thing that you want to do is, at the beginning, like I said, you can do a lot of this yourself, but I think after a while and not a very long time, I think, you can start with easy and simple things like reading, learning, trying new activities or whatever. But I think after a while, what you're going to need is that coach or that friend, maybe even looking at therapy. It really depends on what you need, right? I haven't gone to therapy. I've been thinking about it, but for me, the things that helped the most were my wife, close friends, and like I said, hiring a coach to work with, right? That's what helped me. And I think we need to recognize that we're going to need that help. We can't just do this all on our own. And if we do, it'll probably take twice as long. So I would definitely suggest looking to get some help from somewhere. And next, I would say just be really open to, sort of, like I said, leading with your heart. Like, be more open to stop worrying so much about mindset, I guess would be the way I put it, because a lot of the talk out there nowadays is mindset this, mindset that. And your mindset is definitely something you want to work on. But at the end of the day, if your mind is not in the right place, and your heart's not in the right place, and you're really not going to get that far. If you get your heart in the right place, I believe that that's sort of where you want to focus first. And then that can lead to your mindset changing as well, because I think you need to have a fuller, stronger, more aligned heart, and then your head will go in that direction as well. I think if you do it the other way around, like I said, the mind plays tricks on you. It's played tricks on me for years. And when I started to sort of lead more with my heart, it definitely changed a lot of things and helped me figure out what my values were and get more alignment in my life. And lastly, I think the biggest thing would be to, look at going outside your comfort zone, face challenges that you haven't, that have been scaring you for years, whether that's, trying something new, whether that's, going to an event, some of these seminars that, these huge seminars led by people, whatever it might be, that, it could be even something like, skydiving. It could be posting an article on social media that you haven't really done. It could be even just posting on social media, doing a video, whatever it might be, something outside your comfort. Start doing some things outside of your comfort zone, because that's where you're going to start to learn more about yourself, and you're going to start to see some growth, right? And that's essentially what you're working towards when you're doing that inner work. Because if you wouldn't be doing it if you felt good about where you were at, you would just sort of, continue just doing whatever you're doing, which is what most of us do every day because we're comfortable, right? So if you're doing the inner work, or you're looking to do it and you're finding things are working, getting outside your comfort zone can definitely help. And I know I said that was sort of the last point, but and I brought up this other point that I'm just going to bring up now. Multiple episodes, like I said, so I'll just be quick about it. Start a gratitude practice. That's pretty much it. Like, one thing that I would definitely say, and whether you're starting the inner work now, whether you're going to do it later, whatever the case might be, like, I would say today, like, finish this episode and start a gratitude practice of some sort. My gratitude practice is pretty simple. I journal every morning and I write 2 things that I'm grateful for. And even throughout the day, sometimes I'll just think about a couple of things that I'm grateful for. There's people out there that'll do 5 things. There's people that'll do 3 things. There's people that'll do 10 things. There's people that will have a separate journal for their gratitude. It doesn't really matter how you do it. Just find a practice that works for you and start doing it. So yeah, guys, like I said, the inner work, it's not going to be easy. It's not going to be, go to sleep one night, wake up the next morning, and the inner work's done. It's going to take time. It's going to be a lifelong journey. You're going to need help doing it. So don't be afraid to ask for help. Start slow, start easy, and then just work your way towards building up and figuring things out. And like I said, lead with your heart, man. I really honestly think leading with your heart is the key to fixing a lot of our problems, because I think our heart knows more than our head, or even, any books or anything else that we can read. So that's about it for this week, guys. As usual, if you want to talk more about this, reach out to me on social, book a discoverable call. whatever it might be. If you have my number, text me, whatever, however you want to get in touch with me, get in touch with me. I'm definitely open to talking about this more, sharing more about my journey if that's going to help, or giving you some more tips if you need them. Thank you guys for coming and listening every week. I really appreciate it, not only to the interview episodes, but the solo episodes. And yeah, guys, we'll see you again next week. Take care. Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed the podcast, please subscribe and follow the podcast on Instagram at vulnerable.podcast or on Facebook and LinkedIn. You can also follow me, Brian Almeida, by searching my name on all platforms. If the podcast has impacted you in any way, I would also greatly appreciate a review. Lastly, if you know anyone with a great story of going from struggle to success, I would love to have them on. Thank you and see you next week.